The Galactic Engineering Commission had stood for 12,000 years as the supreme authority on technological advancement. Its marble halls floated in the neutral space between the three great powers, and its word was law. When Commissioner Al received the assignment to audit the spacefaring species, she expected it would take perhaps a week. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. They were infants. They were nothing. She was wrong. The first sign that something was different came when her survey vessel dropped out of hyperspace near Earth's orbital ring. Al had seen many. They had built crystalline stations that sang with harmonic resonance. The consortium had constructed platforms of living metal that repaired themselves. They had orbital gardens that stretched for thousands of kilometers. The humans had built junk. That was her first thought. The stations were ugly, covered in bolts and welding marks and exposed pipes. The ships that drifted between them looked like they had been assembled from spare parts. Nothing matched. Nothing flowed. It was chaos made physical. But then she looked closer. A cargo hauler drifted past her viewport, and Al noticed the crew through its windows. They were not human. They were a species her database listed as pre-industrial. They should have been farming mud on there, not piloting starships. Yet there they were, guiding their ugly vessel toward a docking bay with practiced ease. She saw more as her ship approached. A shuttle, but modified beyond recognition, its elegant curves hidden beneath human attachment points. A transport with its crystal spires removed and replaced with what looked like water tanks. Everywhere she looked, she saw pieces of familiar technology made unfamiliar. Her junior auditor, a young consortium citizen named Thresh, made a sound of disgust. "This is theft," he said. "They have stolen our designs and ruined them." Al did not answer. She was watching a small vessel limp toward the station with smoke trailing from its engine. Before it could even request help, 3 other ships changed course to assist. They were all different species. They moved together like they had done this 1,000 times. When she landed on station, no one important came to greet her. The dock supervisor was a woman named Mala who apologized for the mess. The humans were busy, she explained. They were running a workshop. "What kind of workshop?" Al asked. "Reactor maintenance," Mala said. "Anyone can attend. Would you like to see?" Al would. The workshop was held in a cargo hangar that smelled of oil and hot metal. Perhaps 200 beings sat on crates and boxes, watching a human woman in stained coveralls explain the inner workings of a fusion reactor. The woman spoke slowly. She used simple words. When someone raised a hand to ask a question, she stopped everything to answer it fully. Al recognized the reactor design. It was based on consortium technology, the same technology that powered the great ships of the elder races. But something was different. The human had stripped away the elegant casing. She had replaced complex components with simpler ones. She had added labels in a dozen languages. "This part here," the human said, pointing to a glowing cylinder. "This is the containment field generator. It keeps the reaction stable. If it fails, you have about 10 minutes to shut down before things get bad. On the original design, you need a specialized tool to access it. We changed that." She pressed a button, and the cylinder slid out smoothly. "Now anyone can reach it," she said. "Anyone can replace it. You do not need to call the consortium. You do not need to pay their fees. You do not need to wait 3 months for a licensed technician." The room murmured with appreciation. Al saw beings scribbling notes. She saw them leaning forward with hungry eyes. These were not engineers or scientists. These were farmers and miners and traders, ordinary people from ordinary worlds who had never dreamed of understanding the machines that ruled their lives. At the end of the workshop, the human handed out manuals. They were printed on synthetic paper, thick and durable, filled with diagrams and instructions. Al took one. "How much?" she asked. The human looked at her with confusion. "It is free," she said. "Knowledge should be free." Al returned to her ship that night and began writing her report. She wrote until the artificial dawn cycle began, and then she kept writing. By the time she finished, she had produced the longest preliminary assessment in commission history. She titled it simply, The Human Problem. The reaction was immediate. The collective filed 17 formal objections before she had even submitted the final draft. The consortium dispatched a legal team of 40 specialists, their ambassador, and issued a statement calling humanity a threat to galactic stability. The humans sent one trade representative. His name was David, and he arrived at the commission headquarters wearing a simple suit that probably cost less than the buttons on a consortium diplomat's sleeve. He seemed confused by the armed escorts. He seemed confused by the formal charges. He seemed confused by everything, and Al began to suspect it was not an act. The hearing convened in the grand chamber beneath a ceiling painted with the achievements of 1,000 civilizations. The consortium's lead counsel spoke first. He spoke for 6 hours. He detailed every license humanity had purchased, every design they had modified, every manual they had distributed. He called it piracy. He called it theft. He called it an attack on the very foundations of galactic order. When he finished, David stood up. "I am sorry," he said. "I do not understand the accusation. We paid for the licenses. We followed the terms. What exactly did we do wrong?" The consortium council stared at him. "You are technology," he said. "Yes." "You made it accessible to anyone." "Yes." "You gave it away for free." "The manuals, yes. The training, too." The council's voice rose. "You devalued our intellectual property. You undermined 12,000 years of careful control. You gave power to species that were not ready for it." David was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that would be quoted for centuries afterward. "Ready," he said. "That is an interesting word. Tell me, who decides when a species is ready? Who decided the Eye were not ready to leave their mud farms? Who decided the outer colonies were not ready to maintain their own reactors? Who decided that knowledge should be locked away and sold to the highest bidder?" The council began to respond, but kept talking. "I have been to the outer colonies," he said. "I have seen what happens when a reactor fails and no one can fix it. I have seen children die because the medicine synthesizer broke and the consortium repair fee was higher than the entire colony's yearly income. I have seen people trade away their futures for technology that your engineers made complicated on purpose, just so you could keep selling service contracts." The chamber was silent. "We did not steal anything," said. "We did not break any laws. We just refused to accept that the way things are is the way they have to be. We looked at your technology and asked a simple question. Why is this so hard? And when we found no good answer, we made it easier." The consortium council found his voice. "You cannot just change things," he said. "There are systems, there are hierarchies, there are reasons." "What reasons?" asked. The council did not answer. The hearing lasted 11 more days. Al watched it all. She watched the great powers argue about intellectual property and licensing agreements and technological standards. She watched them cite precedents from thousands of years ago, when the consortium first established its monopoly on advanced engineering. She watched them speak of tradition and stability and the proper order of things. And she watched David sit quietly through it all, occasionally asking questions that had no good answers. On the 8th day, she requested permission to present evidence. The chamber granted it reluctantly. She walked to the central platform and activated a holographic display. "This is the Eye," she said. The image showed a planet of mud and rain, primitive settlements scattered across swampland. This was taken 40 years ago. She changed the image. "This is the Eye today." The planet had changed beyond recognition. The swamps were still there, but now they were crossed by bridges and causeways. Cities rose from the water on pillars of steel. Cargo ships lifted off from spaceports that had not existed a generation ago. The consortium argued that the Eye were not ready, Al said. They said it would take centuries of careful development before they could join the galactic community. They said rushing the process would lead to disaster. She paused. The humans gave them manuals, she said. The humans taught them to repair their own machines. The humans sold them ships at cost and showed them how to fly. And in 30 years, the Eye went from mud farms to starships. The Consortium Council interrupted. This proves nothing, he said. We do not know the long-term effects. There could be cultural damage. There could be societal collapse. There could be consequences we cannot yet foresee. Al looked at him steadily. I visited the Eye last month, she said. I asked them about cultural damage. Do you know what they told me? They said their culture had been dying. They said their young people had no hope, no future, nothing to look forward to except a lifetime of mud farming while the stars remained forever out of reach. They said the humans gave them something more valuable than technology. She turned back to the chamber. They said the humans gave them hope. The vote came on the 12th day. It was not close. The commission ruled that humanity had violated no laws, broken no treaties, and committed no crimes. The consortium's objections were dismissed. Their complaints. They sent a new ambassador who quietly asked for copies of the human manuals. But the ruling itself was not what mattered. What mattered was the amendment. Al had spent the nights of the hearing drafting it. She had revised it 100 times, searching for exactly the right words. She presented it on the final day, when the chamber was exhausted and the delegates wanted nothing more than to go home. For 12,000 years, she said, this commission has recognized only one form of contribution to galactic civilization: invention, discovery, the creation of new technology. We have measured greatness by novelty, and we have rewarded those who hoarded their discoveries most carefully. She let that settle. I propose a new category, she said. I propose that we recognize democratization as equal to invention. I propose that spreading knowledge deserves as much honor as creating it. I propose that a species which enables 1,000 worlds to feed themselves has contributed as much as a species which first discovered agriculture. The chamber stirred. The Consortium Council rose to object, but the commission chair waved him down. The motion was seconded by an Eye observer who had earned her seat through a loophole no one had ever bothered to close. It was thirded by a junior delegate who would face severe consequences from her government, but did not seem to care. It was fourth and fifth and sixth until the chair had to call for order. The vote passed by a margin of 3-1. They called it the amendment, though David insisted he had only been doing his job. He returned to Earth on a commercial transport and went back to work the next day. When journalists asked him how it felt to change galactic history, he said he hoped it would help people and returned to his desk. The amendment took effect immediately. Humanity was formally credited with pioneering democratized engineering. It was the first such recognition in commission history, and it carried the same weight as an invention credit. The elder races were not pleased. The consortium reduced trade agreements by 60%. They imposed tariffs that made human goods almost impossible to import. 3 civilizations issued formal statements of disappointment. 7 more quietly their ambassadors. But something else happened too. Within a year, the workshop spread beyond human stations. Instructors began teaching atmospheric processing to desert worlds. A coalition of species that the consortium had classified as primitive established their own engineering academies. The rigid hierarchies that had defined galactic civilization began to shake. Within 5 years, the first independent shipyard opened. It was run by Eye engineers trained on human stations, and it built vessels for anyone who could pay. The ships were ugly. They were practical. They were covered in standardized attachment points and universal connectors that any mechanic in the galaxy could understand. Within 10 years, the consortium's monopoly on reactor technology collapsed entirely, not because anyone had stolen their designs, but because the designs no longer mattered. Human versions did the same job for a fraction of the cost, and anyone could repair them. The great service contracts that had enriched the consortium became worthless overnight. The elder races called it chaos. They said humanity had destabilized the galaxy. They said the natural order had been overturned. They said terrible consequences would follow. And consequences did follow. On a distant colony world, a young girl who would never have been allowed to touch advanced technology grew up repairing reactor cores and dreaming of the stars. On a trading station at the edge of known space, species who had been enemies for centuries found common ground in a shared maintenance manual. On 1,000 worlds that had been written off as irrelevant, people looked up at the sky and realized for the first time that it belonged to them too. Al retired from the commission on the day the first I-built starship completed its maiden voyage. She had spent her entire career cataloging the achievements of civilizations, and she knew she had never cataloged anything quite like this. The ship was called Hope. It was ugly. It was practical. It carried a crew of 23 different species who had learned to work together in human workshops. Its reactor ran on consortium technology that any of them could maintain. Its hull was covered in attachment points that accepted components from a dozen different civilizations. It was, by any traditional measure, an abomination. Al thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She received an invitation to the launch ceremony, handwritten on synthetic paper in a script she did not recognize. The note thanked her for asking the right question. It thanked her for believing that the old ways could change. It thanked her for something she had not even known she had done. It thanked her for giving them hope. She attended the ceremony. She watched the ugly ship rise through the atmosphere on pillars of fire. She watched the crew wave through the viewports, their faces bright with joy. She watched the vessel climb toward the stars that had once been reserved for the chosen few. And when it vanished into the darkness, she smiled. The elder races would never understand. They would never see what humanity had truly accomplished. They would look at the chaos and the disruption and the overturned hierarchies, and they would call it destruction. But Al knew better. She knew that humanity had not destroyed anything. They had simply opened a door that had been locked for 12,000 years. They had looked at a galaxy built on secrets and scarcity and asked a single, devastating question. Why? And when no one could give them a good answer, they had decided to build something better. Not alone, never alone. That was the part the elder races missed. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had not imposed their will on lesser species. They had not built an empire of obedience and fear. They had built something far more powerful. They had built a community. And as Al walked back to her quarters, she found herself humming a tune she had heard in a human workshop. She did not know the words. She did not know where it came from, but it stayed with her for the rest of her life, a reminder of the day she had watched the galaxy change. The stars belonged to everyone now. The humans had made sure of that.